So what we are going to talk today is on the SCADA web HMIs. And the idea is to understand, different kind of vulnerabilities that persist in those kind of web interfaces that are used by SCADA devices. So let's get it started. So a little bit background on mine. I'm actually architecting the cloud threat labs for a cloud security firm called Elastica. We're based out of San Jose. And I wrote a book on targeted cyber attacks. If you get a chance, just try to take a look at it, and just normal scenarios. So before going to discuss the research in this talk, I just want to lay a disclaimer. Whatever the vulnerabilities or the issues that we're going to discuss are solely based on my research. It does not relate to my previous or present employers. And all the vulnerabilities that we are going to take a look at have been reported to ICS CERT in this scenario. And they are in the process of patching it. A couple of the vulnerabilities have already been patched. So Siemens and other vendors are actually working to address the issue. So let me get into the brief idea of why SCADA is becoming a problem because of like a big critical infrastructure or any several things, because this is getting on the edge right at this point of time. Attackers are targeting SCADA infrastructure, devices, and all along try to get control of the infrastructure. And then from there onwards, you can have a diversified impact on the target. So just to pick up some what media is talking about in here, SCADA system face diverse software attack threats and several other issues. But the end point is this is a problem. And we need to take a look into it as a community, hunt for vulnerabilities, report to the ICS CERT, and just make it secure. But later down the lane, during the course of this presentation, you will realize the security design is completely broken for this. So we'll take a look into it. So before moving further, let's have an idea of the vulnerabilities of SCADA that are being existed in the last few years and how the trend is going on. I took this snapshot from the SCADA Hacker, a very good website. Go along. I mean, there's a lot of interesting resources on it. And so they actually took their statistics from the OSVDB, and then they get an idea that how the trend is moving forward. So until now, 2015, you'll see 98 vulnerabilities have been released. And if you look at from the last couple of years, the trend is increasing. It's exponential. So it means that the more you get a visibility in here, the more you're prone to attacks in this scenario. And that is what's happening with the SCADA infrastructure. Another brief look on the way the SCADA vulnerabilities from the ICS CERT advisories. So this one is released by Fortinet a few days, just like a few weeks back. So if you get an idea, you will come to know that they have put up like a granular analysis, like different kind of vulnerabilities that exist in SCADA devices here. And so it goes from, buffer overflows, directory traversals, man in the middle, DLL hijacking, and different kind of things. But even if you look this scenario, vulnerabilities like remote file inclusions, local file inclusions, authentication bypasses in those scenarios, still is a wide variety of, vulnerabilities out there. We'll take a look into it. Now, again, it's a big problem because if you look at the crimeware as a service, where attackers in the underground market, basically compromises the SCADA infrastructure and sell the control to the other buyers for just making money. And that actually is a one interesting point, is that because the security is not up to that mark with the SCADA security, so it becomes very easy for them to go ahead, just sell the access, whatever, for manufacturing plant, dosing pumps, and things like that. But this is a big problem these days, and as a community, as I mentioned earlier, we have to come front and find issues, report, and help them to patch things. So take a look at it, the simple SCADA model. I mean, sometimes I have a couple of discussions with pretty good researchers and other audience. Sometimes they think like HMI is not actually a part of SCADA, but if a whole model, if you look at, so this is an HMI is a one component of it. You have a PLC, programmable logical controllers. You have drivers that are driving the SCADA devices. In this picture, I have basically taken a simple scenario for, you have HMI component, PLC, then you have an interface through drivers, and then it goes from the endpoint where the actual manufacturing plant or various devices that are put in works. So if you look in this particular model, you see that HMI is the front end. And from there onwards, you get a lot of statistics about the different components of SCADA. And you can perform operations, you can look into statistics, you can go ahead and execute commands that will be flown through PLC, through drivers, and then at the endpoint motor. So target is looking into the HMI this point on. So basically, an web HMI is a human-machine interface through a web. Could be a web server embedded in a firmware. and kind of other application, desktop applications, but in this particular talk, we are targeting the web. An interesting point is that HMI provides, as I mentioned, a visual representation of what is going inside the complete SCADA environment, and how the data is taken from the panel, and then how it is taken from the various devices that are running at the back end. So in a simple way, it's a centralized control center managed through web, which means that if you control the web, the front component of it, you can do much more with it. And we'll take a look within a scenario. So this is basically a web HMI. You can consider any web application, any embedded web server in a firmware which is exposed on the internet or maybe not properly secure and things like that. But our motive in this particular talk is to go into the design and the security of that web HMI, how they have actually designed, why they are not following the secure design principles, and what could be the impacts. So in this particular talk, I mean, you can say that most of these devices are not deployed with SSL, which is fine. They are, basically configured in a wrong manner because not securely configured. They are having a default username and password, or even if they configure the password is weak. Have self-signed certificates, no concept of declarative security, which actually means that if the web server tries to send some sort of headers, the embedded web server have no capability at this point of time to send some sort of headers back to the browser, and from there onwards the browser can act accordingly, for example, X-frame options, content security. So there is no concept of that at this point of time. But we are not going into these issues in this talk, but what we are going to talk about is how the design has been done. So what we are going to hunt in this, so any embedded firmware, primarily web servers, Java clients, Flash clients, web technology used by HMIs, anything that is exposed through web or thin or thick client is a target in this talk. So we are basically, in this particular talk, is going to target the front end. Any web-based software that is used to control HMI, any software that is used to support HMI, any web component providing interface to the SCADA device. So that's the target here. So what vendors we are going to look into from security vulnerability point of view. So there are a plethora of vendors out there, but I chosen for this talk is Rockwell Automation, Allen Bradley Devices, Schneider Electric, Prisma, Moxa, Kako, Siemens. And there are a whole lot of vulnerabilities out there which I cannot discuss in this talk because of time constraint. But overall scenario, there are a lot of vulnerabilities out there. And we'll take a look, and you might think it is a fun, but it is actually a fun. When you look at the vulnerabilities, there are so ridiculous vulnerabilities out there. Now we are going to target for the next couple of minutes on the BMX family of devices which are being provided by the Schneider Electric. It's basically an HMI active web services as a part of the web server embedded in the firmware. It provides real-time communication with the Ethernet, TCP, IP, what are being used for that end device. It has a capacity to host dynamic user-defined web pages to provide a lot of information what's going on. As a one target, let's talk about some vulnerabilities. So while I was doing research on it, so hard-coded vulnerability, hard-coded password actually for the FTP account and they're one of the jar file. We have multiple CSRF vulnerabilities, remote file inclusion, local file inclusion, insecure authentication design. And in this particular device, I want to lay more stress on the RFI, which I'll be demoing. Hopefully the DEF CON network will work, otherwise we have a video. But let's just go into a bit of analysis. So let's say you go ahead, and I have not masked URL in this case, but if you go ahead and you find this device and you open it in your browser, you will be presented with a Java. Basically, you need to install a Java applet for that. So you will be served like this. You say you want to install it, because in order to access all the HMI functionalities, you have to access this Java template, and then you have to install it accordingly. So when you install it, you come up with, when you download this Java applet, you try to look into the source code, where the Java applet has been placed, how you can access it, and things like that. So the whole, this slide is going to tell you that where the Java applet is placed for that particular web HMI and how you can access it. Basically, simply looking into the source code of the web browser. Now, when you do the source code analysis, I'm just presenting a figure here. So if you do the source code analysis of the jar file, you will get an idea that there is a one hard-coded password in it, and which is actually, you can see, factory cast at Schneider, and then you have a FTP login assist dialog. So you're basically looking into the decompilation of a jar file, performing source code analysis, and this is hard-coded. And you can use it to actually access the FTP account on the server. Moving forward, so little bit doing a bit more of source code analysis, you get an idea all the config paths are basically hard-coded. So you can pick the path, put it in a URL, and if you are authenticated, you can even access it, or in certain cases, you can even bypass that too. Moving forward, so cross-site request forgery vulnerabilities, no tokens are specified, so there is a complete URL, which is simply HTTP get URL. You have these parameters. You simply force the user to click on the link, and you can change the password. You can control the editor password, and things like that. It's all open in that scenario. And this one is one of the my interesting one. So they have a vulnerability in the scenario. It's an unauthenticated remote file inclusion. So there is a one URL. When you go search for URLs on that web HMI, you get to the one specific URL which they're not validating the input you are supplying. So it is basically framing the content. So in this case, I have shown that on this particular device, you can include a remote file. And I will be demoing just a bit in seconds. Similarly, all these vulnerabilities are also present in the factory cast devices. This might be by Telemechanic, and I think Schneider Electric and Telemechanic are not collaboratively releasing these devices. But if you go ahead, even like previous devices, some old school devices, or even some of the devices that are being released these days, the same vulnerabilities apply to factory cast. So I want to demo here the remote file inclusion vulnerability. Hope the network works. It was working just 5 minutes back. So. Anyways, so. Well, it happens at DEF CON all the time, but I have a backup. It was a very interesting demo to actually show that how you can even download Azure's malware in an encoded format to the device. But if you get a chance later on, and I can show you where the network is working. But so this was the demo. So let's take a demo look from the video point of view. So in this video, you will see that we are highlighting a remote file inclusion vulnerability in Schneider Electric BMX P34 CPUs, basically the web HMI. The video might not tell you the exact that how you can download even a Zeus kind of thing in an encoded format, but it can give you an idea where is the vulnerability and what you can do with it. So we just try to, you're as a researcher, you try to look at what's going on in and out of the system, and you can see that even if you try to access some resource, it is basically restricted. So you need to provide a basic. So they have actually a basic authentication here. But we have, this is the case we want to show. We actually want to look at it. So I closed it. So now you see that the vulnerability is present in one of the setup index.html file where they are not actually validating what kind of content is being passed through it. So you can easily load any third-party website directly into it. So in this case, we just uploaded the Black Hat one. So I can explain that how this can be used in targeted attacks. The similar case, you can go for, find a host or some sort of malware on the third-party domain, Zeus or any other variant of it. You basically encode the URL, or you can use a URL shortener you can simply pass it through it and force the user to click it, basically any SCADA administrator or the guy. And in that way, you are able to download the malware on the end user system. And it's very interestingly, you can also pass an exploit code through HTML file. So whenever it's got framed, the exploit code will execute in the browser, and then you can get compromised directly, basically simply through a RFI in this case. The next device I'm going to target here is the MOX IO logic, just from the authentication point of view. It's just a simple discussion. So basically, they don't provide any built-in support for HTTPS in this. If you look at how the password is being hashed, it's basically the MD5, and there is no salt provided for it. So, which makes it pretty much vulnerable to the replay attacks. And even you can crack it within a speck of time. So whatever the vulnerabilities I'm discussing in this, we have tested on a various versions along different devices, and these are basically tested on the real devices on the internet. So this is basically in itself is like in a bad design where you pass your credential in the HTTP GET, because it's get cached everywhere, and then it becomes easy for the attackers when they get access to that, any proxy device or maybe on the web server, everything's gonna get cached. So that's actually a bad security design. But in this case, we did a test for a real-time device maybe. So in this case, if you look, you will be presented with this web login prompt, the remote IO server. You provide a password, and that kind of HTTP request is issued. So you can see easily that there is MD5 hash is passed. And in this particular case, so we actually moved forward and just open some normal website on the internet. And then you can see here that when we passed the MD5 hash, it was easily crackable. And once you get an access to the password, you can go ahead and access the complete MOX logic. So the problem is that no salt passed in HTTP GET, vulnerable to man in the middle, and things like that. But this is a big problem with from the authentication point of view in several web HMIs. They are not up to the mark. Now, on the next target is our Siemens Semantic HMI web. I personally like the vulnerability that exists in this web HMI. The reason is that because this HMI provides an Explorer interface. So when you click the Explorer interface, you will be presented with the directory listing of all the hard drives that are connected to it and any directories that are present on the server. In that scenario, if you move forward, just a case, so I want to highlight what vulnerability present in it is like cross-site file uploading. So it's possible to actually upload a file by sending a crafted link to a target. Once he clicks the link, the file will be uploaded to the USB device that is connected to the this web HMI or even any Explorer interface on it. But again, CSRF vulnerabilities are there. You can execute any command or force the user to perform any actions which you are not authorized to do. In this snapshot, you get an idea that when you are uploading a file, no tokens are specified, which is very bad design practice. And but this exists. So this is actually a web HMI for the Siemens Semantic HMI web. So I have actually shown an Explorer interface. So you can get an idea. We are into the root directory of that web HMI for this particular one. And there is another small snapshot is presented there that once we uploaded the file, you can access the file directly from there. And if you look at this particular screenshot, you get an idea that we use a simple XML HTTP request to trigger the cross-origin, not a cross-origin actually, just trigger the cross-site request, and then from there onwards we can upload any file directly to it. And then actually once you access it, you get a control of it, you can process files, you get a lot of data out of it. Maybe you can also upload a malware through the USB directly. If you remember in 2009, the Stuxnet, where they simply upload a malware on the USB, but in this particular case, you can route it through the web and just force the user to click on a link. File will be uploaded directly to the USB, and once they disconnect it, it can be taken care of that. And that is one case, but you can also upload files on the web panel and things like that. So you have another cross-site request forgery vulnerability. You can delete any files by again forcing the user to go ahead with it. No tokens problem. You can keep on deleting files, log files, and other interesting things. Now let's just take a look at this vulnerability. So actually, if I remember correctly, Siemens is actually in the process of patching this vulnerability, or might have already patched, but you can try. So now in this case, we go to the file browser. You can see that there's a www root temp directory, storage card 2, and so now this is our target. We want to upload a file here. I've just created a custom demo, so just for the sake of showing what is exactly happening at the back end. So we click the button, but you can basically send a link. Once it has been clicked by the user, the active session is there, so automatically cookies will be taken care of, and then the request will be issued. So this is a cross-file site file upload vulnerability. Exploit with just uploading a test file. If you see, we don't have any test file at this point of time. So there's no file uploaded right now. And let's trigger the exploit code. Just try to show that how the request has been issued through the HTTP Fox. And this all, the URL can be sent all in automated manner. So let's say we clicked it. The request has been issued. So the request has been accepted by the web server. And so this is a file. We uploaded a simple text file in this case. Now if you go back and we refresh the page, and there you go, we get a test2.txt file there. So idea is that you can upload any file, executable, or other cases, as I mentioned earlier, and from there onwards you can even access the file through that URL. So it's just like routing or compromising the end systems through web. And all these vulnerabilities play a significant role in it. And all these vulnerabilities, as I mentioned, tested against the real environment. So moving next, we're going to target like Kako Solar device in this scenario. I'm not sure you're interested, but these are interesting vulnerabilities to understand what kind of design they are following. In this Kako Solar device, they have a, again, hard-coded administrator password. And these devices are heavily used for HMI visualization of solar plants, and we'll just take a look into it. Once you open this HMI interface through a web, you will be served with this XP Java template. They call it, but just the name. So you have to install a Java, or you have to download a jar file to it. And in the another snapshot, you can see that there is a links to where the jar file is placed. So we follow the same tactics, and we perform the source code analysis, and then from there onwards, we get an idea. It's just an old system for the vulnerability demonstration. So if you take a look in that, so you get a username and password as Kaki2, and then something Kako 2008 and all that. Now, interesting part is that this password will give you a direct access to the web HMI. Now, when we use this password, and then here you can see that we get access to that device. And if you see on this HMI interface, there is an inverter placed in that mimic diagram, and then you can get the complete idea that you are in control of that this solar panel, or maybe the solar devices through inverters and all that. But the problem again here is that it's just a web. Through web, these problems persist, and from there onwards, attacker can exploit it very, very easily to gain control. I always believe that if I can do it, then I think any other person can easily do it. Because the reason is that as a security researcher, you think from that perspective, and attackers are like thinking from much more wider perspective, because they have a lot of time, significant resources to invest, and I think these vulnerabilities can be pawned pretty easily, and they can control all these devices. So we can take a look into it. Demo here. Just a 1-minute demo, just try to show that the vulnerability actually exists here. So the vulnerability has been reported to ICSR. They are working with the vendor now. So see, you get a Java applet like this. Although you have to accept the risk in this case. We are accepting, try to load the Java applet in here. So let's say by default we're going to try the admin password, but it's not going to work. It did show you're not allowed. So we're going to forward our simple tactic. We're going to go into the source code, and we'll go for the jar file to try to see what resides in there. And we found that they have this vms.jar file. And I already downloaded it earlier, and now we're going to look into the source code analysis, just a simple thing, 5 minutes of stuff. And once you look at the classes, once you do a lot of source code analysis, you need to be, you get an idea that where you have to look into. For example, authentication login classes, session identifier classes, and things like that. So you're just skimming over things. So first we're going to look into any hard-coded configuration and other things. So now, here you go. So when we look into this, the class has like hard-coded information. It's just like a 5 to 10 minute of job in this case, and for advanced attacker it might be a little lesser. But again, the thing is that your hardcore credentials are being present in jar files, flash files, insecure authentication design frameworks, and we are using SCADA a lot these days. And we are finding vulnerability as protocol levels, Modbus and all those kind of things. But we also need to look into the web HMI. It's just broken. And we'll take a look a bit more into it. Now, if you see that I got access to the complete web HMI, I can look into, I can change configuration, and I can screw the device if I want. But it's just for testing purposes. So again, you don't need to attack the infrastructure right away. You just need to access the device through web. And then you have the idea what's going on in and out of the system. And there you go. You got access. Now, in the next set of devices, I'm just going into a wide variety of devices to show that the vulnerabilities that we are discussing in here are not actually present in one specific device. It's a wide range of devices. And in this time, I cannot cover all the vulnerabilities, but still, whatever the best I can, I will take care of it. So in this Rockwell Automation Ethernet series, there's a variety of, they have devices here, i766, i769 family, and thing. Simple thing, I want to highlight information through disclosure, basically through default files. Just open it, there's a lot of information being present in it. By default design of web applications and things, you need to get the credential first even to provide any kind of info. But in this case, that design principle is not followed. Again, you have a RFI, you have a local file inclusion, and long-lived cross-site scripting. Cross-site scripting is good to just find out, but again, it can be used in specific scenarios. But in case of SCADA, I don't consider that kind of pretty advanced vulnerability, or basically hardcore one. So if you look at this particular screenshot, information disclosure is happening. We move forward, remote file inclusion. Again, we just uploaded that Black Hat web page in it, and it's all unauthenticated. So you don't need to wait for the person to first do the authentication and process the link. You just click the link, things will be done. And I see if I get a time later on and the network is working, I prefer to show you that demo, that how you can download malware on the fly with this thing. So cross-site scripting, as usual, is unauthenticated. Simply send a link, get whatever you want. Now, so we have gone through the Schneider electrical devices, these Rockwell, Caco, Prisma. Now we're going to target actually Prisma Web. And this is kind of pretty interesting. It's one of the most, I think, easy vulnerability you can say, or a funny vulnerability when you see. So Prisma Web is one of the vendors that are based out of Europe, I suppose, and they actually build different devices like metal detectors. They build devices like checkwares and stuff like that. And they also build devices for X-rays like inspection machines. So interesting thing with this device is that through the web HMI is the password disclosure in JavaScript file. Who could have even imagined this? So let's say you are at some sort of airport or some other place, metal detector, you found that there's a Prisma Web metal detector is there, somewhere you get an access to the IP, boom, you can do a lot of bad things out of it. It's all in JavaScript, the client side. And it was working, and although the vulnerability has been reported. Again, CISA, full of heck lot of vulnerabilities, which I don't want to go in right now, but this one is interesting through simple JavaScript file. Take a look. So we access this Prisma Web here. right? So you get served with this web panel, and from there onwards, we try to look into the source code to just understand, what kind of components are being used, what kind of files are being included in with this web HMI. If you see now, we access two specific JS files. One is like login.par.js, the other one is config.js. So the config.js is like how it has been configured in a simple manner. But if you look at the login.js, it says Prisma Web and Prisma. So this actually shows that they might be running, in this case, a default password could be possible, but they are storing it in a JavaScript file. So if you are going to configure, or any SCADA administrator are going to configure a new password for it, it's still going to be present in the JavaScript file, because that's exactly how device works. And so we have the credentials. So I got access to the Prisma Web by just using that simple password. And from there onwards, you can see that is some vertical device. You can set up the parameters. It can screw up the process if it is going in. But this is one of the funniest vulnerability I've seen in this SCADA HMI research. But it has a lot of impact. I mean, with this vulnerability, if you're going to manipulate metal detectors, I mean, it's just crazy. But it's in front of you. From there onwards, you also have a cross-site request forgery. Means the concept of tokens is totally not followed with SCADA HMI. Simple through HTTP GET, and you'll change the password on the fly, and then you can get access to it. Now I'll see if internet is working, but looks like we are not lucky today. Anyhow, but I can show you the demo if you're interested. I mean, just outside somewhere, I can show you the real time how this can be. I mean, just some live device somewhere. Moving forward, now we're going to take a look into the ITC controller devices, primarily the dosing pumps. So if you look into these dosing pumps, these are basically used for pumping water and some sort of other purposes. Again, you can look into the snapshot and you can get an idea that what it actually looks like as the controller 3000 design for it. And you again have a web HMI for it. But they have like some problem with that. Again, you can upload the firmware in this case. It's just a variant previously from where we are uploading the files. Now you can go and upload the firmware through cross-site request forgery. And from there onwards, you can go ahead and play. I mean, the device will be screwed in this case, but this is also a problem. So there are a lot of other vulnerabilities also present in this ITC controller, which I might not cover, but it's just an open platform. You can go ahead if you get some time. Or motivated enough to hunt for vulnerabilities. I think this is a very good platform, and to work with the ICS cert to report them and patch those issues. And following that, this is just a one IDC controller dosing pump, the request, HTTP request and response mechanism. And from there onwards, you can see that how the request has been issued and has been accepted, so you can upload files, firmware, and things. So with this vulnerability, once you control the firmware, so you control the dosing pump. In addition to that, these are poorly configured. You can find a lot of devices with default passwords and all that, but this is just from the design perspective, how the security has been, lined according to the research, basically the people who actually develop this kind of devices. Now, from there onwards, hunting continues, and here we're going to do a little discussion. And the idea, this is just the tip of the iceberg. If you go around and search, there's a heck lot of vendors out there that provide web HMI services. And if you keep on looking into them and try to perform research into different devices, you will find a lot of vulnerabilities. It's just not a rocket science. It's just you need to look into the control point which you need to control. And from there onwards, you can spy your own inputs, stuff, and then you see that device is working according to the way you want it to be. But there's a big playground out there. It's seriously broken. Not enough vulnerabilities in web HMIs have been reported back to the ICS cert or there, but more all like the protocol level, DLL hijacking level. But if you open the scan, there will be a lot of vulnerabilities in there. And from the conclusion, I can only say with this research, and there are other vulnerabilities out there, the SCADA web HMI security is completely broken. Why it is so? Because we always used to say old is good and old is gold, and you can see like SCADA technology is being used for a long period of time. But in this case, when it comes to security, it's not that golden. But the problem here is that it's still being used in most of the critical functions on the internet or our day-to-day routine purposes. Like I discussed earlier, metal detector, dosing pumps, and then there are a lot of other additional details that are out there. So easy to find vulnerabilities, so easy to attack them, so easy to control them. And you can see that how kind of big market like crimeware as a service can be built out of it. You can go ahead, find it, register an account, and start selling these devices in the underground community. But this is a real problem. And for that, I think for researchers, any motivated people, they need to come up and hunt vulnerabilities, work with the teams, whatever the best we can. But this is the actual state this point of time. Moving forward there's some of the relative research which I've done earlier and other people portals, good resources to look into to understand what kind of vulnerabilities have already been disclosed, what new are there. But I personally feel that the vulnerabilities like cross-site file uploading, firmware uploading, remote file inclusion, all have a substantial impact considering the state of security in web HMI. And thanks, and I'm open to questions. Feel free to have any questions, and if you need some demos, I can show you the back end.